I've been reading for some time now, mostly on Daily Maverick, but News 24, IOL, Biz Community, lots of other media outlets have also been covering this. The debate around the flying of the pride flag at Bishop's School. This has been done apparently for a number of years. It was done once and then it just started automatically happening every time Pride Month came in the following year. And then the old diocesan committee voted to ask the school's council to adopt a policy limiting official flags to the South African flag, the Bishop's flag, and the St. George's flag. The argument of the committee was that schools should not decide which causes to endorse. And there are two groups competing for it, not competing for attention, but competing for their point of view to hold. One is called Supporting a Progressive Bishops, and this is calling on the school to continue flying the Pride flag during Pride Month. And then there is another group supporting a United Bishops. They're backing the old diocesan committee request for a formal flag policy that does not allow for the flying of symbolic flags. And I've been thinking about this and going, come on, what's the fuss? Pride Month, Pride flag, for goodness sake. Fly it. What's there to complain about? And then I thought, would I think the same about other flags? And I started, popping up. Would the Boerestaat in Orania, would I want their flag to be allowed to fly? No. How about the Palestinian flag? Fine by me. The Hamas flag? No. The Israeli flag? No. The Russian flag? No. Yeah, so where do you draw the line? What flags, what symbolic flags, what flags which represent things beyond the immediate premise are acceptable and which are not? Jacques Rousseau is a lecturer in critical reasoning and ethics at UCT. Jacques, good afternoon. I'm not sure that logic is necessarily the best way to approach a debate like this. I mean, emotions have a role to play, but from a logical point of view, how does one look at this?
John, that's a very, very broad question. I'll give it a go, even though you said this was going to be a tentative discussion in your earlier introduction. Yeah. Look, I mean, I think the key logical point to raise here is that, we can't do much about people, right? They keep on putting us in these binds, but the separation that many people aren't getting is that there are actually two clear issues here. The one is the governance issue and who has the right to decide on things, and the other one is the moral and the virtue sort of thing. And the letter was very compelling, but it would be far more compelling if it was decontextual or completely outside of this context, because in context, where this flag has been flown since I think 2021. For about 2 days each Pride Month, alongside all sorts of other flags, St. George's flag, Black Lives Matter, Africa Day, World AIDS Day, even Movember, for somebody's sake. The objection comes now. And that's, of course, what provokes the response or the sentiment that this is a clear homophobia. I wouldn't want to say that, but I would want to say that the argument is actually sound, that there should be a policy around various flags, and we can get to talking about that in a moment. There should be a policy, but this is absolutely the wrong context in which to raise it, because the children that you're trying to protect and made to feel included in a school context are being made to feel threatened, because the removal of a flag is the same thing as an act of putting up the flag. It's taking away that indication of support. So it's a politically loaded action. So that's the key logical framework I'd want to suggest, is that we need to separate the governance stuff from the ethics and the virtue stuff.
So if it makes sense that there is a policy which decides, or a policy which suggests or frames the parameters in which certain flags are flown and other flags are not, then it's best if that suggestion for a policy is raised outside of Pride Month. I don't know if there are any months where, who leads the discussion? Because this seems to be led by people who don't want flags, and shouldn't the debate be between people who want flags and people who don't. So I'm just really confused about how to get to a point which unites the school in a progressive way. So sort of to bring the two groups, the progressive bishops and the united bishops, together into a progressive and united bishops.
Well, here's two suggestions. The one would be that the policy, this kicks off a robust policy conversation, which has to include the students, of course, which I'm not seeing any mention in the coverage so far. The students have been asked for their opinion. So if you have three flags, right, where one is this rotating flag, the workable rules that they can implement is to distinguish between commemorative and pastoral flags, so things like Pride, things like November, even if you like, things like the Springboks, I mean, things that no sane person would object to. They've had cancer awareness, etc., versus geopolitical flags. I mean, things that do not affect any random member of the population here, which aren't about personal identity, but are about causes that are geopolitical in nature that we can't influence as a school. Those ones would need a harder scrutiny to be flown, or perhaps never be flown, and that's where those off-piste letters from people like Herzog miss the point, is that here we are in a pastoral setting dealing with people who we are in loco parentis of, and we don't want to enforce our ideologies on them. So those broad commemorative and pastoral things, fine, but causes, political causes, things which actually have geopolitical impact, those things are off the table until people can actually have that robust academic debate and decide for themselves. School is not the place to do that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if people complain about Pride or November or whatever, then they're hypersensitive, and we just need to deal with that flag as it comes, but that shouldn't be policy determining.
Okay, so Pride is acceptable, Movember is acceptable, Africa Day is acceptable. I mean, how much debate is there about the Russian invasion of Ukraine? I would imagine most of the bishops' community would be on Ukraine's side, so fly the Ukraine flag. But no, don't fly either, because it is a geopolitical sticking point, a point of discussion, point of contestation. Don't fly the American flag on July the 4th, because there are a lot of people who don't like what America is doing and has been doing globally, and so on.
Precisely. And I mean, some listeners might recall that in October 2024, the previous chair of the council, Crispin Son, had to, or resigned. I don't know whether he had to or whether he chose to resign around the Israel-Palestine thing, because he posted something on Facebook that raised controversy on that point, and was then recognized as a no-brainer that wasn't the place of somebody in that position of authority to present that view while holding that office at the school. And the same thing would apply to Russia, Ukraine, to Gaza, to Israel, but not to things that are about our social fabric and our belonging and our welcoming of diversity amongst our school population.
I'm just trying to think of other examples that might be contested but should be accepted. And
Pride is on a theme, right? And Pride is in a sense a bit of a liminal one. But I don't think that it's controversial enough to in any way meet the threshold for kind of rejection outright, in a sense. I mean, I think there we can take a stand and have the naysayers just, suck it up in a sense and persuade them otherwise. But I can see an outright ban on things like Gaza, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, etc. Those things make sense. I mean, it's not part of our ambit as a high school, or as a school rather, to comment on those things.
Because, I mean, isn't part of school discussing things, and the flying of flags leads to debate, leads to unhappiness, leads to anger, leads to tension, leads to dialogue, leads to resolution.
No, it certainly is. But I mean, note here that we've got this three flag system, which maybe they want to revise. But in this case, it becomes, in a sense, an official representation of a school view. So if you were going to have, I agree we should have those debates, but then you could, for example, put up a flag of Russia and Ukraine and say, this week we are going to be talking about this. It wouldn't serve the same purpose as a generic expression of a point of view or a solidarity or a sympathy or whatever the case might be. It would be framed in an entirely different way.
Yeah, Yannicka says those flags are different to the pride flag, political versus gender issues, to which one answer, maybe it's not a very good answer, is sometimes, in some people's minds, gender issues are political.
No, they certainly are political, but they're political about us, about our pupils and so forth. They're not political about some other part of the world that we have no influence on, and that you're not dealing with a large cohort of Ukrainian or Russian or Israeli or Palestinian students. You're dealing with students who are ostracized and vulnerable and young, and in that sort of case, you're saying you are welcome here, which the school has said to their credit. The problem here is people saying you aren't allowed to say that. What is the problem with that? I mean, there are no signatories. You'd never find signatories opposed to a cancer awareness flag, right? So the timing really does them no favors, even though, as I say, the letter does make compelling arguments around the need for a sensible and robust and repeatable policy, because you can't have any incoming principal of the school suddenly decide to use that opportunity of the third flag to endorse their own pet causes. There's got to be a structural agreement in place as to what's permissible and what's not. And I think that geopolitical versus, pastoral and commemorative is the right distinction to go for.
I should be going to news now, but I want to read Wahid's message to you, Jacques, and ask you for a relatively quick response, please. Is a school not supposed to be a place for contestation of ideas, which I did say? We don't need to pretend to be polite by ignoring serious global matters that require ordinary people to take a stand. It is precisely this that leads to injustices being confronted and resolved.
That's precisely right, but we do need to build up that scaffolding process. I mean, you get to being able to debate sensibly things like Israel-Palestine a bit later in life than when you're in high school or primary school. Right then, you might be somebody who's insecure and looking for a safe place in which to do the learning in order to allow you to become able to talk about Israel-Palestine.
Jacques Rousseau, thank you very much indeed, lecturer in critical reasoning and ethics at UCT.